Hey everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Brittany Lewis and I'm a professional artist, graphic designer, and tarot deck enthusiast. And today is the day that I set aside time to work on my dream project, the Cosmic Gateways Tarot. Now I've already had a few technical issues prior to starting this live stream. So if there is an issue with the sound or anything, please let me know in the chat. We're gonna proceed. We're gonna proceed where we left off. Hey PL, I'm so happy to see you. Where we left off last week was we did the flats layer for the Three of Cups. So today we're going to be doing some fun stuff. We're going to be adding some information to our characters, some details to our characters, and I'll show you all about the process of how I go about doing that. So we're just going to jump right in. So today we're actually going to be starting with the grandmother figure. So just a little bit of backstory, just in case you missed the last live stream, we've been working on the Three of Cups. The Three of Cups represents community, represents celebration. And so the story behind this card is that our main character, who is in green, is having a coming of age ceremony. So she's surrounded by her mother and her big sister, and we're just going to work on adding detail and fleshing out this particular image. And I'm going to be using the Queen of Wands as a main reference for this, especially when it's painting the grandmother figure, who is in the back also in yellow, and it's going to sort of give the same vibe. So we're just going to jump right in. What I'm going to do is over to my right hand side is my label. It's going to be up here, right? What I want to do is I'm going to change the blend mode of my sketch to multiply, and what that would allow me to do is see the sketch underneath or on top of whatever I paint beneath, but it will actually blend into the color, so it won't be as harsh, especially once we turn it down a little bit. Hey, Draw Sketchbook, I'm so happy to see you. Welcome. So glad to see you guys here. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm a little bit how should I say, I'm a little bit all over the place because it was right up to the last minute that things were kind of working for me, but we're gonna ride with it. So I'm going to turn down my sketch. So what I did was lower the opacity to about 38%. That felt right to me. This is at 100%. And again, we're going to go down to about 9, and that will allow me to see the information that we've worked so hard on over the last couple of weeks with the sketches, but it will allow me to also sort of fill in some of the gaps where we've missed colors, and then add details, but still sort of see my groundwork that I've laid up until this point. So what I am going to now, because we're going to start with our grandmother figure, is I'm actually going to go ahead and clean up some of her flats. Now, last episode, we did go over the sort of the process of laying flats and doing the colors and things like that. I didn't necessarily want it to be perfect in terms of laying like that. That's something that I'll clean up in this particular stage as we add details. So I'm going to do that now, and I'll probably start with her face because faces are pretty easy for me. And again, I am using my Queen of Wands as a reference, so it should go pretty smoothly. We'll see how that goes, because so far there have been a few ups again, but we ride with and roll with. I'm really happy to have you guys here. I also haven't talked to anyone today, so my voice is getting warmed up to using my vocal cords and all that. So we're just going to we're just gonna go with it. So I hope you guys are having a great day today. I hope you all had a great week this week, and I hope that the time isn't throwing you off too tough. I guess we lost an hour, so spring forward. We jumped up an hour, which is something I don't understand the purpose of in this day and age. But we all are agreeing to it. So we're going to go from there. So again, what I just did was just sort of some light cleanups, cleaning up the shapes. And when I lowered the opacity of my sketch, this allows me to see the actual colored shapes a little bit better than if I had myself at full 100% opacity. So I'm just cleaning up some of the shapes, and then we'll get into her skin, and then we'll move around and jump around. I don't know if we're going to work on any of the other characters today. We'll just kind of play it by ear and see how it goes. But I wanted to start here just because I guess I have her color already available to me, and that is through the of wands. So that sort of helps me out quite a bit. But one thing I want to keep in mind as I'm doing this is that I actually want my main character, who is the little girl in green, I want her to be the light source, right? So I have an idea that in this ceremony, what they're doing is sort of, lending energy to her, and she is lending energy to them. So it's very much an energy exchange. I want that to be illustrated in a way where our main character glows in some way, right? So last week before or actually as we wrapped up, I actually had the little girl in a pink dress. I decided to go with green so that we are nodding to not only the colors with the blue, yellow, and red, but also the elements, right? We have a representation for air, we have a representation for water, earth, and fire, right? Lent itself a little bit better. It also looks better to me, so I'll show you guys what it looks like prior to making the change to green. So I had her in pink, just a generic pink. It worked, but I like the symbolism of having a green dress instead. And actually, as a matter of fact, what I'm going to do is clean up my file. I'm going to get rid of that pink layer because I don't need it, and we'll put her at green because I like it. Right? All right. So we're going to get into the face of our grandmother. Now we did do a little bit of work laying down some basic information as it comes to where her eyes are going to go, where her nose is, her mouth, and all of that. And so we're just going to use that information and give her some detail. All right. So luckily we have all of our labeled, so that helps me sort of navigate my layer panel so I can find exactly what I'm looking at. And just like I did with her dress, I'm going to actually take the same color as her skin and just clean it up a bit, get rid of some of the transparent areas, and then we will add some light and shadow. And again, I am using the same color palette as Queen of Wands. So I'm just going to pick from the Queen of Wands because I've already done the work of determining her shadow colors and her highlight colors and all of that. And since I do want this character to nod to that character, we're going to use the exact same color palette. All right, so the first thing I'm probably going to do is lay in some shadows. And I did use sort of a blue, a very muted. I used the blue, but it turned out to be a much more muted brown. It reads as blue because it's up against a blue background. So I'm going to use that exact same color to lay in the shadow of her neck. Before I do, I'm going to actually select the skin so that I know that I'm only painting on the area that has her skin tone. But we're just going to lay in this very basic shadow. And it looks a little scary, looks a little harsh right now, but we'll work it out in just a bit. We're going to indicate that she has a shoulder. And we're just going to sort of play around with light and shadow. Now she is, again, for the most part, neutrally lit, but again, we're going to have a secondary light source from our little girl, our main character. And I am experiencing a little bit of a lag, so the brush strokes may drag a bit. I just want to show you guys how I begin to lay in information for faces. So I like to start, it really doesn't have a rhyme or reason. Usually I like to start with laying shadows in because that'll allow me to see sort of where the highlights go. It also allows me to establish the light source in the face. And then from there, it's just building up color and value. All right, brush. There we go. And going from there. So I've actually been doing a bit of research because it is getting about time that I start to price again the creation of this deck. I actually went back and looked at some of the notes that I had from 2020, which is when I was going really, really strong. Of course, we had the pandemic going on, so I had all the time in the world to work on the Cosmic Gateways Tarot. But I am to have the deck manufactured within the next year or so, hopefully sooner than later. And part of that research is, one, going back and comparing the notes. Also, taking into consideration all of the changes that are happening within, like, tariffs and all of that. All of that sort of plays a part. I don't know how much of a part it'll play because we're not quite ready to print just yet. So for all I know, things will sort of be back the way that they were by the time we get around to printing this particular project. But it is something that I would like to sort of get a head start on, or refresh the information that I have in terms of creating a tarot deck. So I actually saw a thread today with someone who was illustrating, she is an illustrator, and she was asking about how to price sort of illustrating a deck for someone else. Now, because there is quite a lot of work that goes into illustration, there's a lot of work that goes into taking commissions in general, that is working for someone else or collaborating with someone else and sort of building out a project based on their expectations. With that comes communication. With that comes sort of translating their ideas into finished, images. And it can sometimes be a little bit of a headache, right? It is a lot of fun. I think a lot of artists have a hard time creating sales because we're so used to collaborating with other people. But if you are in the market for, wanting to hire someone to create your tarot deck, just there are a few things to keep in mind. One, budget will often dictate the level of service that you'll have access to. Now, you can reach out to artists who may not be as experienced in creating tarot decks. You can set up a deal where there are residuals. There's a lot of different ways to navigate it. But if you are running into an artist that will charge you per project and then want residuals, that is fair, right? That is something to keep in mind. And typically, when you are doing something like a book project, or which is a tarot deck is considered a book project, or can be considered a book project because it's often sold right alongside books and literature, there is probably going to be a page rate or a per illustration rate. Just kind of depends on the person that you are going to be working with. But with that, just because you are hiring someone for a job does not mean that you will be guaranteed copyrights. So that is something to keep in mind. If you are looking to hire an artist to do your tarot deck, your oracle, even if it's just books, even if it's just children's books and things like that, those are some things to sort of keep in mind as you are approaching artists, as you are sort of pricing the work, and thinking about what it is that you want to bring into existence. Now, a great artist will probably have some sort of consultation with you just to sort of see what the expectations are so that, they can decide if it is a project they feel worthy of taking on. That is also a thing, right? I know early on in my career, I would have people who would approach me for projects, but I think under the guise of you're going to take it because I'm asking you to take it, that is not a realistic expectation to have. And if you are an artist, I implore you to be selective about, if you can afford to be selective about the projects that you take. You know what I mean? Because if you're taking something that you're not connected to, it can be a not so great experience, right? Unless you are sort of detaching yourself from the outcome, which I also recommend doing, especially if you're doing something that you're not necessarily going to benefit from outside of being hired to do the job, right? So one of the things I've done over the last 3 or 4 years is be very selective about the projects that I take, because I want to be able to give my best to whatever it is that I work on, right? And I want people to be able to, have a great experience with hiring me as an artist or graphic designer projects. But if you are in the market, that is just something to sort of keep in mind. Your budget does dictate the amount of or the level of service and expertise that you will have access to. Now, I do not recommend going broke to have a project done, because there are artists and professionals for every budget imaginable, right? It's just a matter of connecting with the right person. In doing so, you want to make sure that you have a contract in place. So that is something that I don't work without. I used to for very many years. You have situations that call for, or that sort of teach you that was probably not the best way to do business. And so from then on, began to work with a contract. So two things that I require are contracts to be signed, so that we're going to be absolutely clear about the expectations and the amount of work that'll be done. From there, we draft an agreement, and then after that, there is always a deposit required. And so that is part of my process. Every artist is going to work very differently. Some people don't require a deposit. They want you to pay up front. That is fair. That is the way that they do business, for whatever their reason is. So that is something to sort of look out for. If a artist is too cheap or too expensive, and of course all of that's going to be relative, just sort of beware. You know what I mean? Make sure you're doing your due diligence. Make sure that you are researching the people that you to work for or work with, I should say, and go from there. Because I've seen a lot of people who are, especially in the indie author realm, who are hiring artists and then having these really awful experiences. But I feel like just a little bit of due diligence goes a long way. So communication is going to be one of the most important things that I would take into consideration when you are hiring an artist, graphic designer. Make sure that whoever you're working with communicates well, right? Because when you're working with someone and when you're hiring someone to provide a service for you, it is very important that you communicate your expectations, you communicate your needs, and it's important that they communicate their process, right? Because everyone's process is not going to be the same. Everyone's requirements are not going to be the same. So make sure that you're clear about that. Make sure that you're clear in what it is that you're wanting to do, right? Make sure you're clear in their actual ability to make that happen, right? Because that is important as well. You don't want to have false expectations happen. You don't want to set yourself up for failure. And just make sure that, again, they're super communicative. For me, communication is a huge deal when it comes to creating work, because a lot of times I am tailoring the work that I do for the client that I'm working for, right? So if I don't have direct thing, if I'm not able to get information about their likes, their desires, their goals and all of that, it can be very difficult to create. You're sort of just, throwing darts in a dark room, right? And then hoping that you're landing somewhere safe or whatever the case is. So you want to make sure that you are communicative, and you want to make sure that your artist or whoever the service provider is also communicative, right? It's not unusual to have to pay again a deposit for the service and have that deposit be non-refundable, but you want to make sure that you're getting the the right kind of reputable, ethical person to work with you. And asking questions is going to be very paramount when it comes to making sure that this person is A1, right? So right now we're auto saving. We auto save. I want to show you guys just a reminder of what the Cosmic Gateway Tarot looks like. Now this deck began in 2019. It shows up because again, there it is. I'm having a little bit of a lag, but it began in 2019. The goal of this deck is to be a 78 card deck with a guidebook and an optional companion book. And again, I have not decided yet if that companion book is going to be sold separately, like at a separate time from the main launch, or if it'll be launched together. With that though, just some things that I have to do as an artist and as a creator. I still have about 42 cards or so left to do. The guidebook I sort of write as I go, because as I complete each card, there's each card, and so I make the insertions into the book at each card that I do. It's been sort of a great help in terms of staying on track and staying on track with the goal. Other than that, I don't know yet if this is going to be a Kickstarter or straight to pre-orders. It'll kind of depend on a lot of things. Part of that will be where I am in the process of launch my Kickstarter. Ideally, I would like to have the deck complete and just ready to go, right? Because as someone who has participated in quite a few campaigns, nothing is more aggravating, I guess, having a back in the Kickstarter and then it not going out when you're expected to. But of course, you want to have grace and things like that with creators, because things happen, and a lot of times it happens outside of the control of whoever is running the Kickstarter. But if I can minimize that as much as possible and just sort of have it ready to go, and all I have to do is submit it to be printed, I think generally as a consumer, I would personally feel better about backing something like that, right? All right, so I'm going to turn off my sketch just to sort of have a look at what we got going on. I'm just laying down lights and shadow, nothing super fancy or anything like that, but if I turn off, sort of gives me an idea of what my figure is beginning to look like, and so far not too bad. Now we're going to be at her face for a while. We're just going to again lay down basic shapes basic tones, and things like that. Able to go in and add cheekbones and highlights and lowlights and everything in between. So yeah, we'll get back to it. So I'm going to turn my sketch back on, and again, I'm experiencing a little bit of a lag. So this is going a little bit slower than I would like, but we shall continue and press forward. So one of the things I'm going to do now is sort of tighten up the shape as best I can. I'm going to tighten this up just a bit. One of the things that I'm happy that is sort of coming along well is that we can sort of tell her age so far just based on the way we laid out her, the features of her face, right? So we're just going to do this just a bit like so. And we'll continue sort of making our way around. So one thing that we don't have yet is going to be highlights. And before we do, I want to establish smile lines, because again, this is an elder, right? Is this our Queen of Wands? It very well could be, right? Very well could be, but I definitely am intending for them to be very similar, right? Very, very similar. All right, so we're going to come down, just moving around the canvas. So when I'm doing this, I'm not necessarily trying to reach for perfection. Yeah, I am laying down the groundwork so that I can come back and again tighten it up a little bit later. This is how I approach the Queen of Wands, very much the same way. And oh, there we go. We'll sort of smoothen things out as we go. Right. So when hiring an artist, again, there's always going to be someone who fits within your budget. Do have a budget in mind. I think that's very, very important, because what ends up happening, or what has happened from my experience, is that oftentimes you'll have people who will inquire about work, and they don't necessarily have an expectation of it costs, right? So your costs, you're usually paying for, and just like anything else, you're paying for experience and expertise of the person that you're hiring. You're paying for operating expenses. You're paying for like the communication, all of that. All of that sort of goes into the cost of hiring an artist to do work for you. But again, some of that, not some of it, all of it should be discussed before you book the artist, so that you have clear expectations of what to expect, the scope of work, right? And again, having an agreement in place is so paramount. So for me, what happens is someone will approach me with a project, right? So let's say that they are wanting a children's book, and they want, hey, Black Zay too, and they are wanting to commission 24 illustrations for this children's book, the length of like a picture book, 24 pages, right? What I will do is we'll go over their story. We'll talk a little bit about it. Oftentimes you'll get, just sort of depending on the experience of the person who's hiring me. If they're new to hiring a professional, sometimes there are barriers to break through, because there is the thought that if I share too much information, this artist is going to sell it. I don't have any interest in doing that. Most artists don't, right? So try to get as much information project as possible. The tone of the book, the age of the audience, sort of age of the reader who will be reading this book. The expectation of, are they full pages? Are they spots? Whatever the case is. So I'll get all of this information, and from there, I will craft a proposal. So this is usually received in a PDF. So I will send out a proposal to say, hey, this is what we've talked about. Based on what we've talked about, here is what I am able to deliver to you. This is the timeline that I would estimate would be the timeline for completion. This is the cost of your deposits, or if it's not paid, this is the cost of the deposits. This is how much it'll cost to, do whatever it is I'm going to do, right? So they'll get this proposal. From there, they can say, okay, that's great. Let's go ahead and we'll proceed. Also in that proposal, I will lay out sort of the design process. So for me, it's always a sketch. Everything starts as a sketch. So you guys have watched me sort of go from thumbnail to sketch to flat, the whole thing. That is my process across the board, no matter what I'm doing. If it's a logo, if it's children's books, illustrations, if it's portraits, whatever the case is, I always start off with the sketch. The reason that I do that is because it's much easier for me to change a sketch than it is for me to spend hours on something and then have to go and change 12 hours worth of work by doing another 2 or 3 hours. So if I can establish whatever we're working on and create that solid foundation in the sketching phase, that is the most important part. So let's say we're working on this character and spending the time making her face just right and awesome, and her eyes are all this time fleshing out this illustration. I present this illustration immediately after talking to, and they say, I don't like how her face looks. I don't like how her mouth looks. Can you redraw it? Now I've spent hours redrawing or drawing and then doing all of the steps. So for me, sketching is number one. I always have my clients approve the sketch before we move right out. Okay, so Black Zetsu said, is it not a good idea to hire two artists designers at the same time for the same project? And if you do hire two, to tell them about each other? Great question. Thank you, Blake. That was an awesome question. It depends on the project. So great example. I had a book cover design that did a book cover 2023, and in this book cover, the author hired myself as a designer. He also hired a interior designer. It can be helpful to notify whoever you're working with that there's another person. They can communicate back and forth and work as a team. That can be extremely helpful. One of the things that I would actually suggest doing is, before hiring either designer, see if they're able to provide the service for, however many aspects it is. In this case, there was a cover designer that was myself, and also a person who did the interiors. I also do interiors, right? So she could have hired me for both roles, but it's totally up to the author. I would suggest letting them know about each other. You can put them in contact with each other if the aspects of the project are related. I think that can be extremely helpful. So pretty much you're building a team. You just have to kind of play it by ear and see what works best for your particular case. So in the case of, let's say for instance, we're doing a tarot deck, I'm the illustrator and there's someone who is writing the books. Unless the book descriptions affect illustrations, then there's really no need for the writer and the illustrator to sort of communicate. It just kind of depends, but I think that is a great question. In the case again of like the book cover, or like if I'm doing children's book illustration and I'm not doing all of the parts of the children's book illustration, if I'm doing the illustrations and then there is someone who is doing the layouts, it can be extremely helpful for us to communicate, because I can design a page and they can say, okay, well, I don't think the wording is going to flow well with this page. It can be extremely helpful, to have that sort of communication between those two lines. So just kind of depends. It depends on the designers. It depends on the task and the role, and it depends on, I guess, the project. So I hope that was helpful. But yeah, so for me, again, back to like the sketches and things like that, that's super important, right? That goes across the board for all the projects that I do. So in the case of doing the children's book, right? So I'm doing a children's book and there's a graphic designer. So I'm doing the illustration and there's a separate designer who is designing sort of the layout. It would be for me, right, to do sketches for each page spread layout, and then, or do it as sets, and then have it go to, or just sort of collaborate with the graphic designer to say, okay, I think you should maybe move this part and that part, this, that kind of thing, right? That could be helpful. So sketching would help, because if I've sketched, it's easier for me to move elements and to change sort of the flow of different things in that phase than it is for me to spend, 6 months working on illustrations only for it to come back and say, okay, well, no, I don't really like how this page, all of these different hiccups that can come about, because revisions are part of the process. So if an artist is taking on a project, it is very important to be able to eliminate as many opportunities for revision as you possibly can. But again, it's part of the process. So you just sort of want to think ahead of, okay, they're probably going to want to change this aspect or that aspect. If you're having them approve that part first, then that sort of kind of makes everything else flow a little bit easier. So I hope that was helpful. So sketches is, I guess, after we've signed our agreement, after we've gone through our proposal and all of that, and we're starting the project, sketching is number one important thing. And I express that to all of my clients, right? From there, it is a matter of, spending the time to flesh out the illustration. So because I've laid out a very tight sketch, right, because my client has already approved this sketch, it's just a matter of adding color and detail and things like that. From there, there may be changes to sort of like the color palettes, but it'll be a lot easier to deal with than having to like redraw an entire picture book or comic book, or whatever the case is. From there, so make sure that if you're hiring someone, they are explicit about their design process. Now, again, depending on their level of experience and expertise, they may not know, and that's okay, right? Remember, your budget is going to often dictate the level of experience and expertise that you have access to. So that is something to bear in mind. So I'm looking at our second screen. Our grandmother's coming along really well. We have her mid-tone, we have her shadows. I'm probably going to go ahead and start adding a little bit of highlight to her face. Keeping in mind where our light source is, which is going to be our little girl. So the bottom of her chin may be lit a little bit. The top of her nose may be lit just a bit. And she may even have a little bit of lighting at the bottom of her nose, because she has light that sort of hits her from the little girl. Now, I do have an idea of having the little girls glow bright pink. I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know if I'll like it, but we'll try it as we go. But we're going to lay in some of her highlights. Now, I do think this looks a little orange, so I'm going to desaturate this a bit, lower the value of it, meaning making it just a little bit darker. Maybe just a little bit more dark. And then we'll add in her highlights as such. Like that. And I love painting faces. I think portraits is probably my favorite art form that I do, and I would consider myself a multidisciplinary artist. I love painting faces. I love being able to sort of give character and personality, whether I'm making up the face or if I am doing portrait painting. Portraits are always fun, but to me, it's a very intimate form of art because you're sort of trying to capture the nuances of whoever it is that you're painting. So I have done so many portraits with so many different personalities and so many different characteristics from older grumpy gentlemen to sassy women to all kinds of things. I love painting a good portrait. And so I use that experience, because I've painted lots and lots of portraits over the years, to sort of help me craft these fictional faces, right? So this isn't someone in particular. When we were drawing her face, it just sort of went with what looked right for the features that I already established. And so I get to use sort of, call back on my experience as a portrait artist to be able to do that. Now, what I'm doing now is I am taking a smudge brush. As a matter of fact, what I'm going to do real quick is turn off our sketch just so we can see what we're working with. There we go. And then we can tighten things up. So I'm using my smudge brush to sort of move around color and give her face a little bit of texture. And we'll smoothen some of this out if we feel the need to. Because she is an elder woman, I really don't feel like I should, because I feel like giving her a little bit of texture will sort of help us know again that this is an older woman. And this is also, by turning off our sketch, it's also easier for us to see where we need to sort of add more detail to the picture. And again, I'm experiencing just a little bit of a lag, so this is moving a little bit slower than I would like. And we're going to auto save because I got my little bubble, my little bubble showing up. Hopefully it's a quick one. If not, then we'll show you guys again what the Cosmic Gateway Tarot looks like. It seems like a good time to segue into that particular reminder. There we go. All right. There we go. So yeah, that was a great question, Black Zetsu. So I really appreciate you for asking that question. And if you have questions about hiring a graphic designer or illustrator, I am more than happy to share my own personal process and what I believe that you, as someone who is hiring someone else, should sort of look out for. Most now, I see a lot of times, especially within the indie author realm, that they'll get a lot of cold DMs. Most artists that I know of aren't necessarily cold DMing people on, or threads or anything like that. So if you're getting a cold DM, those are never pleasant, right? It's like getting a telemarketer call. Just sort of beware. Generally, that is one of the easiest ways that I found people are getting scammed, is just sort of responding to cold DMs. But if you're so inclined to respond to a cold DM, and by cold DM meaning unsolicited, someone's like, hey, I saw your page, I saw you're writing something, I would like to offer you this service. There are people who do that. It is still a thing that happens, right? If you sort of called to respond, right, and you're curious, whatnot, that is when you begin to do your due diligence, right? Before you even answer, go look at their page, go see if they have process videos, go sort of see if there's a level of consistency with their artwork. That is something that you can do prior to even answering the DM, right? A lot of, I think, things happen. So, we've all sort of, hopefully not all, but a lot of people have sort of had the experience of being taken advantage of. Don't allow that to dictate how you or your thoughts about hiring artists, because we're not all scammers. Speaking for myself, we're definitely not all scammers. But I do have a series on this channel that is entitled Hire Like a Boss. I believe there's a playlist for it. In that playlist, I go over all of the things that you should know before you hire a graphic designer or illustrator or whatever creative professional you're looking to hire. With that, we talk a little bit about copyrights and licensing and fees and sort of all of the different things. A lot of it, most of it, 100, I would say, maybe not 100, all of it is based on my personal experience. Having some, challenging clients, and sort of paying attention to how people approach hiring me, right? Or how people have approached hiring me over the years. There is a lot to it. But once you sort of find someone that you trust, start building relationships. If you find someone that you want to work with, start building relationships with that person. Ask them again about their process. Ask them again about, what it is that they love about what they do. Because if they love what they do, chances are they'll love, what they do for you. Right. So again, I am someone who is pretty selective about the projects that I take. It has to be something that I absolutely feel I am the best fit for. Early on, that wasn't necessarily the truth of how I selected projects. I would pretty much just take whatever came across my desk, right? And with that, I have been able to work on lots and lots of different things. And that also helped me to sort of figure out what it was that I'm best at, right? So I think early on, if you're starting out your journey as a commissioned artist or a freelance designer or whatever the case is, whatever your title is, it's perfectly okay to take different projects until you sort of find that one that you absolutely love to do, that you absolutely love, that you want to specialize in, right? And from there is going to be a whole host of people who are looking for a person just like you with your experience and expertise. All right. So what I'm doing is just sort of, again, moving around pixels. She's not looking super duper realistic, and that's okay for this character, for this particular card. That's perfectly okay. We got 4 people to draw. So long as she looks like a grandmother, right? So long as we can face that she is celebrating, or, that she is taking part in this ceremony. What I'm going to do is zoom out a bit. I do have, again, my sketch turned off so we can just see what it is that we're working with, right? And then as I progress through this image, I'll go ahead and add more details and things like that. So as I zoom out, that helps out a lot, because now I can sort of see areas that I would like to, for instance, this area here. And by this area here, I mean, hopefully you guys can see my my cursor. Looks like it needs to be shaped slightly different, right? So if we zoom out, we're not so precious about the details. And we can do something like that. And what I'm going to do is deselect her skin, and I am going to select or work. I don't know if I'm going to select it yet, but I am going to work on her hair. There it is. And we have it labeled Granny's hair. I think I am going to select it. So so let's say for instance, I want to select her hair, and that's all I want to select. What I will hit is Command if you're using the Apple, or and just click on it. And from there, the only thing that I'll be able to paint on is going to be her hair. So if I draw a line out here, nothing shows up. If I draw within this, it shows up where I want it to show up. I'm going to keep it zoomed out. I'm going to use the color that I have as her gray. I'm going to make it a little more blue and a little more saturated. And I am going to actually change brushes. We're going to go to something with a little more texture. And I'm going to just paint in some shadows and highlights. And by adding texture, I think it gives her hair the feeling that of a natural hair, right? Of a type for hair. I'm going to deselect it because hair is not always going to be perfectly, shaped. So I want to extend that texture out like so. Maybe we clean it up a bit. Maybe that was a little bit too much. But what I am noticing here that I don't like is the shape of her. There we go. Shape of head. And so to reshape it, because the hair layer is sitting on top of the skin, I just draw over top of it, right? Something like this. And if I feel like I've gone too far into her face, I just grab my eraser and erase it. All right? Like something like that. I like her. She's looking good so far. She got the high cheekbones. Come on, Granny. We're going to give her just a little bit of highlight in her hair. Again, she's, for the most part, going to be neutrally lit, except for the light that's going to be coming off of our main character. And as we get to sort of creating the main character as the light source, we'll add more information into Granny's skin and her dress and all of the things, so that it's not just glowing, but she's actually affecting the people around her, right? All right, going back to her skin, I'm going to tighten this up a bit. Just this area. Maybe not with the opaque brush. Let's go back to my regular brush. And the brush that I typically draw, most of what I draw everything with, is called Hotline. And this is created by an artist named Eric Anthony. I believe he has a Gumroad, and I love his brush. This is the main one. I do most of my illustrations, even when I'm doing like portraits where I'm intentionally trying to make it look like a person. I usually use this particular brush. It works really well. It is a nice sort of hard round brush with somewhat soft edges. I just like it, right? It used to be a time when I first got into my digital art journey where I was like obsessed with brushes, things like that. I do have a lot of them. Primary brushes are just a regular old round brush. So I think I would like to give her a little bit more color and depth to her lips. So we're going to, because she's Granny, sure enough. But Granny might have she might like a little lip stain or something like that. something like this, right? That gives us a little more variation in her face so that it's not as flat. Something like that. Okay. Like that. So what we'll do now is, because she has a shadow underneath her lip to give it dimension, we'll sort of make that a bit darker, like so. Yeah. And then we might even make the shadow under her nose a bit darker, like that. And then again, she has some laugh lines, smile lines. Like so. Now again, because she's a relatively small character on this card, we don't necessarily have to give her the works when it comes to details, but we do want her to read as Granny, right? To look good, right? So which is why also it's a great idea to zoom out when you're working. So we're not so close to her face, but we can sort of see how well it may read when it comes time to print this out on the card. And she's got some ears on her. So we're going to emphasize some of that. Add in some of these highlights. Something like that. And it looks pretty good. Same thing over here. And we might see a little bit less of the inside of her ear just because of her angle. Like that, right? Let's add these highlights in. And then we may even give Granny some earrings. I don't know. Did I have earrings drawn in? Let's see. We did. Okay. And I'm going to pass it so you guys can see that a little bit. So we did have some hoop earrings for Granny. And so far she's looked good. She looked cute. Go ahead on, Granny. All right. All right. She looks great. All right. So on top of her skin, because I don't know how well I like this here, and I'm going to add or label this earrings. And just in case I don't like it, and if I don't like it, then I can take it away. It won't necessarily affect what I've already done up to this point. All right, so I did have her with a nose ring. I'm gonna zoom in just a bit. Something like that. Maybe a little cleaner. Because I see myself in the Queen of Wands, and I see myself in this grandmotherly figure. And one thing I have is a nose ring. And I love a good hoop. So I like that. I am going to turn my sketch back off just so I can see it a little bit better. Great. All right. And then I'm going to make it a bit bigger, and we're going to take that same golden color and we'll give her some earrings. And we can make this as detailed as you like. I just need the indication that she's wearing hoops. And then I will, depending on how the rest of the image shapes up, I may or may not come back and clean this up even more. Likely I will, just to add some highlights and again some nods to our light source, which is the little girl. But so far I like Granny. She doing a thing. All right. I'm just gonna clean it up. Now another way I could approach this is to use the circle tool, and that'll give me a perfectly round shape that I can use as her earrings. But I like the idea of having this look like I drew it. Right? We do use our shortcuts when we need to. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. You guys will see me as we progress through this image use quite a few shortcuts in terms of, like the line tool or, this tool or that tool. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Just in this case, I think I'm going to keep it something like this, right? Where it looks like I drew it in. Maybe these are like passed down, right? You can create a story. And again, last week we talked a little bit about visual storytelling and sort of, making a story for your creations so that you give yourself direction, right? I think it adds such a nice look to illustrations in general. Just sort of, we're not just drawing something to draw it, which happens, I've done that myself, but I do want to be able to create a backstory for it. I think that's very apparent when it comes to this particular project, because then when I go to write the books, it's like, well, yeah, this happens, and it helps to give more meaning to the cards. All right, so her face looks pretty good. So one of the things you may notice is that the whites of her eyes are not white. that is something you're an artist, please bear in mind, because the whites of the eyes should be relative to the color of the scene, right? So if I made these extremely white, they would look kind of off in this nighttime scene. So I did pick a dark, somewhat mid-tone gray to make the whites of her eyes. That is something to keep in mind. And I'll actually show you. I think I'm gonna show you guys if I can. Let's see if I can pull it up. Another actual portrait that I did that demonstrates this point where the whites of the eyes aren't necessarily. Oh, it's still auto saving, child. When it finishes, I'll show you guys an actual portrait that I did where you a lot of times the whites of the eyes are not white. We just register them in our minds as being white. But I like how she looks. She looks fantastic. I think after we finish, after I sort of get her neck to a place that I want it to be, I'll probably work on her arms and her stomach. And then we're looking at about 51 minutes. It didn't take too long. There's auto save. Okay, and this might take a minute to open. I do want to share with you guys a portrait that I did 2023, I believe. And I'll show you where again, made the whites of this character, not character, because this is a person, this person's eyes were not white as well. So it's taking a minute to load. As soon as it does, I'll show you guys what that. And I know even once I click on it, it's going to take that even longer to load because it is a huge file. But yeah, so as someone who has spent a lot of time studying faces and developing a skill with portraits, I love to be able to create these characters. Now, when we were drawing this, again, I just sort of followed the way that it felt right for the features to look, right? So if I drew the eyes a certain way, what would her nose look like? Okay, maybe that nose didn't look right. So we just sort of flesh it out until it looked like something that I would be satisfied with. All right, so let me see if I can find a great example. And I'm hoping that this opens because I know this is going to be a big old picture, but we'll see. As soon as it lets me see the preview, I'll select it because I want to make sure I click on the right thing. Yeah, here we go. Oh, well, no, you can't even see her eyes. Hold on. Okay, let me find another one. Now, in this case, they are going to be a lot lighter than our grandmother figure, but again, they're not stark white, right? And we'll compare the whites of this character's eyes to his shirt, which is white, so you guys can kind of get an idea of what that actually looks like. So this is a portrait that I finished, I believe, last October. And this was of someone. So this person exists, right? And again, when we're painting sort of different things, you have to kind of keep in mind the colors around them, right? So this is a much brighter scene. Our grandmother is in a nighttime scene. So again, I was able to sort of get away with a grayish look in her eyes. Again, and also one thing to bear in mind with this particular picture is that she's one of a lot that's going on in this picture. So she's one of 4 people in this particular image. So come on, while it's loading, I'll show you guys just as a reminder again what the Cosmic Gateway Tarot look like. It looks like I'm frozen all the way around. Okay, there we go. And so this is the Cosmic Gateways Tarot. So one of the things that I sort of had a little bit of a fear of was whether or not my improved artistic skills would make a huge difference in the way that the card started out looking. But I always go by the High Priestess and the Justice card, which were my first 2 cards that I created for this series. And if I can sort of I feel like those are like my top tier. Like I was really doing my thing when I created those images. And so when I do that, I do sometimes compare the level of work that I do now to that particular work. And it has gotten better, right? It has grown over the last 5 years. But in doing so, I think it's gotten better in the best possible way, right? So I don't think that there's a huge leap where the art looks completely different because my process is pretty much the same. It just looks more mature, I would say. Looks a little more mature. but I also feel like it flows, right? It all goes in line. Especially considering the fact that the faces of the characters are ones that I'm making up, right? So that helps out a whole lot. All right. At some point, this file is going to load, so I'll let that play in terms of us looking at the Cosmic Gateways Tarot so that you guys can see what I mean by the whites of the eyes. It may take a minute here. All right, here we go. All right, so this is a portrait that I did for someone. Now, I want you guys to take a look and compare, even though the shirt isn't all the way white either, right? Let's look at the way the shirt looks. This is a much starker white, but if we zoom into sort of the color of his eyeballs, right, they are much more gray, and in some cases pink than the white. Let's say for instance, we're looking at the white here. It's gonna show up on. All right. Oh, I'm lagging a bit. So hold on one second. Let me show you. But if we're looking at sort of the corner of his nose, right? That's a pretty stark white. Right? About right in here. Is it gonna show me? Mm-mm. All right. So this is a pretty stark white, right? We're not using anything near as bright in his eyes. And that sort of keeps his eyes in perspective to the image. Because if we were to go all the way white as we could possibly go, it would look extremely weird. You know what I mean? So when you're painting portraits or you're painting sort of people's faces, just sort of keep in mind that when it comes to eyes, even though we register them as being white as all get out, right? They're not actually white. All right, so that's a great example I have for that. Close that bad boy out. Make sure we don't save it. All right, so we're back to Granny. All right, so I like the way her face is looking so far. Again, we will add highlights to her eyes so that we know that she's looking down at her grandchild or she's looking sort of out in the head. But until then, we're going to go ahead and work on her hand. Now, for her hand, I am actually going to be using my reference that we created in Clip Studio Paint. This is going to help me to see where certain aspects of light and shadow should go, and especially when it comes to like her hand. So I'm going to turn my sketch back on just so I can see what I'm looking at. Now, with this though, I do have to keep in mind that I do want my light source to be the little girl. So down here, I want this to be the sun. So it may hit this area a little bit different. So it has shadow right now. It may not be in shadow. But for the most part, I think we'll just sort of give it a generic look, and then we'll come back and fix it once I decide how far the light should go, right? All right, so I'm going to select my skin layer again, and by doing so, again, I hit the command button on Mac computer or control button or Windows button, I believe, on a Windows computer. And I'm going to make sure that I include this area that they can get selected. And just like I did with the face, we're just going to clean this up just a bit, make sure that we have a nice flat color to work on. Like so. Oh, wrong color. I'm hitting Alt to select the skin color. Okay, and then we'll just sort of make sure that everything is flat. And that helps because earlier when we selected it, we had a little bit of it didn't select all of it, but now that we have that as flat, if I were to deselect it and select it again, everything should be one shape. All right. Okay, now from here, all I'm going to be doing is taking the colors from her face and applying them into her arm. So we were to zoom in here to our 3D models, who is acting as our reference. There's a little bit of a shadow here. And we're going light. We can go darker here in a bit, or we'll probably go darker here in a bit. But we're using sort of our middle tone brown color just to establish where we want some of the shadows to go. I'm not going to follow this to a T because again, our little girl is acting as the son of this image, so I know using that information that the shadows aren't necessarily going to line up exactly, but we do want to add shadow so that we can add form to our arm. Also, what I'm noticing is that in the cup, her, part of the cup should go behind her fingers. So we're going to erase some of that. And we can keep our skin layer selected because the cup sort of sits within that space, or the part that we need to erase sits within that space. And then we'll come back and tighten that up a little bit later. Until then, go down here to grainy skin and we will work on some of this a little bit more. Like so. So if you are going back to hiring a graphic designer or illustrator, if you are in the market of starting a new project and maybe you are wanting to, wrong thing, what am I doing? Maybe you are wanting to talk about your project. I am available. My books are open for the rest of the first quarter. Well, they're open for a while. And until I book those slots, and then we'll close them up, get caught up, and then we'll open them again. But I do am accepting projects. So if you have a project that you would like for me to work on and you think I would be a great fit for, I would love to talk to you about it. Again, my process is that generally what I'll do is have a consultation, right? So we'll have a meeting of some kind, usually Zoom. We'll have a Zoom meeting and we'll talk about all there is to know about you, right? As it pertains to your project, right? Your goals, your dreams, your aspirations, all of those things. We want to talk about the audience in which you are wanting to sell whatever it is that you're creating for. If it's something that you're going to sell, if it's something like a portrait or something like that, we don't have to go into that many details, right? But if it is a commercial project, I will ask you a lot about, your company, if it's established, if it's a new company, what your goals are for your company, what this product that we are creating together is going to, who this product is going to serve, right? And all of those things, because all of those things will play a part in what it is that we do to create whatever it is that we're going to be creating for you, right? From there, I'll draft you a proposal. So I'll say, hey, based on what we've talked about, this is what I think, we should work on. This is how I think we should approach the problem that we're going to be solving here. This is my idea. And in that proposal, you have information about the scope of work, right, that I'm proposing to do. So the actual, we'll lay it out as a blueprint. So if it's a tarot deck, for example, right, we may negotiate that I do your illustrations, I do your package design, your graphic design, whatever the case, or we may negotiate that I only do your illustrations, right, and you have someone else who will come in and do your packaging and we'll do other parts of it, whatever the case is. All of that will go into the proposal, right? From there, you'll also receive an estimated timeline. So I may say, hey, I believe that this project is going to take us about 6 months to complete. Not the tarot deck because it takes a minute, right? But let's say, for instance, we are doing, I don't know, a children's book or something like that. I say, hey, I think this is going to take this long to do. In that proposal, we'll also lay out a fee structure so that you can say, okay, I know I asked you to do the layouts, but I think for right now, I like to take the layouts off of the scope of work. Maybe I just want to do the not the sketches, but just the pages for now. And I'll look into hiring someone else for other parts. That's fine. That's where we talk about and tighten that up, right? Once you've gotten to the point where you're happy with the proposal, what I will do is, based on the scope of work that we agree on, we will have an agreement in place, and that is a contract. In this contract, we'll discuss your rights, right? Whether or not I am selling or signing over the copyrights. Just as a rule of thumb, most projects are licensing based. If you would like to buy out the copyrights, that usually comes with a heftier fee. That's just sort of how it works. But If you want to buy them out, then you got it. We could, that goes into the contract, right? That goes into the contract. And from there, you can say, okay, great, this looks great based on the proposal, the contract, the timeline, the milestones, because with the timeline, also break things up into milestones, right? So at 3 months, if it's a 6 month project, it will say at 2 months, this is what will happen. At this date, this is what will happen. And then this is the next step, and so on and so forth. So we'll go through all of that, right? And the contract will be the agreement that we agree to, do this amount of work, right? For this particular pay and all of that. So once we have the contract signed, once you've agreed to the scope of work that you would like for me to do for you, from there, it is just a matter of starting. When I'm starting any kind of, even if it's graphic design, if I'm starting a project, I always have my clients approve the sketches. Now, again, I do that because that sort of cuts down on miscommunication, cuts down on revisions later on down the line, and it sets the expectation up for what your project will look like once we have actually started to render and add color and do all of those things. Your sketch is going to be sort of the first indicator that you like where this is going, right? From there, we will do however many rounds of revisions we need to do to make sure that we have the sketch and the foundation the way that you want it to be, so that we know we're moving in the right direction. And then after that, we just work, right? You'll get updates from me. I'm pretty good about deadlines. Very, very good about deadlines. So when the deadline comes up, you'll receive whatever information, if not before, because a lot of times things go a little bit faster than we plan to, but I do like to plan for contingencies. So if you are hiring someone to do your illustrations and graphic designs, plan for contingencies, right? If you know good and well, you're going to have a project, let's say a children's book, and you know that you want to have this children's book prepared for a show a month from now. It's not necessarily realistic to think that that project is going to be done within a month, right? So if you're knowing that you're wanting to have something ready for September, start planning for it and hiring whoever you need for it in January. That way, if it goes longer than you expected to, that way, if there are hiccups along the line, you are not rushing, right? Your creator to create something based on ill planning. So you want to make sure that you plan for contingencies. I try to do my best to schedule projects in a way that I know I have enough time for life, because lives. But I also have time to be able to create a quality project. Don't go expecting something to be done overnight, right? Not unless you're using a certain technology or whatever the case is. But or again, if you're not necessarily, it depends on the style, right? I guess it depends on what it is that you're purchasing, right? But you do want to plan for contingencies, no matter where you're going, no matter who you're buying from, no matter who you're hiring. Plan for contingencies. That means today, again, I have something that I want to, there's a show or something I want to go and do in terms of like a convention that's in September. It's January. I want to make sure that we have the work done by June, right? So that I can print and whatever, and that way you have time for hiccups. Make sure you do that, because you can have things rushed, but be prepared to pay to have things rushed, right? One of the important things that you have to take into consideration as well is that it's not, everything's not on your time, right? And if I am scheduling certain projects, I want to make sure that everything sort of depends on what's scheduled in my books, right? So we want to make sure that we plan enough time for mistakes. We plan enough time for revisions. All of those things has to go into consideration. Very, very important. But again, once we've gotten through the process of, signing everything and paying deposits, and we're on the sketching phase, communication is going to be very important, because it's not enough to say, well, you know what, I don't really like the shadow in this lady's arm. You have to be able to articulate. And my job as an artist is to be able to get you to articulate what about it you don't like, right? What about it you don't like? And what is out there in the world that you do like, so that we can sort of use that as inspiration as we move forward in your project. That's very, very important, right? So you want to be able to communicate and you want to be able to do it in a way that is clear, concise, but also compassionate. Don't just be a mean person just because you don't like something, right? I've had those experiences as well. It is highly unnecessary. And I will fire a client in a heartbeat, fire a couple clients because of the level of disrespect that some people feel like they can have, right? All right. So what I'm doing is just sort of again adding details to her arm. It doesn't have to be fancy because this is a relatively insignificant part of the picture. So I'm just sort of being very broad about what it is that I'm doing, turning off the sketch just to see if there's anything that I need to emphasize, darken or lighten. If there's anything I need to blend in. So for instance, this area here, I feel like I need to blend a little bit, but instead of using my smudge tool, which gives me this really nice wrinkly texture, I'm actually going to go with something a little bit smoother just to sort of get rid of some of these excess lines that I don't necessarily need or like so. And then because that is a bit softer than I want it to be, I'm just going to go back over it with the color so that I can smoothen that out. Something like that. And I do see that I have a little bit of a rogue line. I tried painting over it. I thought maybe it was a sketch, but I believe that is something that is probably on her hair layer. Nope. All right, where is this? Maybe in the cups. Yep. All right. So I want to make sure that I keep all of the pixels where I want them to be, right? So I see this little bit of a rogue shadow. The shadow is fine, but I can't paint on top of it because of the way the layers are arranged. So I'm just going to delete this out or erase this out, and then we'll come back over it in our skin layer. It'll make a little more sense to do. So this came together relatively quickly. I really, really enjoy painting people. I really enjoy painting people, and so I've gotten pretty fast about it. Even with the lag, because I still have a lag on my end. I just enjoy sort of telling stories in people's faces. I don't know. It's something that I absolutely do enjoy. What am I doing? Let's see. Look like I got more rogue information. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to turn that skin back off. I'm going to go on back up here to my cups. And I'm going to make sure I erase all of this brown because it's tangling me up just a bit. But again, this is where having all of your layers labeled is extremely helpful because I can go and say, okay, I know I was working on the cup, so let me go and find the cup layer so that I can clean that up a bit. There we go. All right. All righty. So I just want to, I think it's going to auto save for us again. Because I got the little balloon. Oh, you guys can see it. Okay, sometimes when I show this, you can't see it real well. All right. So as soon as we finish this, with I think her thumb, I think we're going to call it a live stream. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know I was babbling a little bit today because I started off with all kinds of technical difficulties. And I really didn't have a plan in terms of what to talk about this week, but I do know that I've seen quite a few questions about hiring artists and working with artists. And I've even seen today where someone was asking about how to price or structure um, a tarot deck project, right? And so, if there's any questions that you guys have about that process, about hiring an artist or graphic designer, Black Zetsu, I really appreciate your question. That was a great question. Again, to answer his question for you guys who have missed it, his question was: is it a good idea to hire two artists and designers for the same project? And if you do hire two, do I need to tell them? It depends on the role of those artists and designers. You don't necessarily want two people working on the same thing. So if you have a children's book, for instance, you don't want two art styles to conflict. So I wouldn't hire two artists to do that. Doesn't necessarily it's kind of redundant. But if, for instance, you have a children's book and you're hiring an illustrator and a graphic designer, they can work together really well, right? Because the illustrator can lay out the illustrations in a way that works well with the graphic designer. And that's important because not all graphic designers are illustrators and not all illustrators are graphic designers. So a lot of times you have these projects where you actually do have to hire more than one creator because one may not have the skill set to complete certain aspects of a project, right? Great example of this is book covers, right? A lot of people are hiring for book cover artists, but not all book cover artists have the know-how to lay out the actual graphic design of the book cover. So you might be saying, well, what the heck is graphic design of a book cover? So let's say, for instance, you are hiring someone to do an illustrated book cover. We're doing Granny in the Cup, right? And this is my grandmother, and she's holding the cup. And so someone is doing the illustrations. You have to know where you want to keep the title, where you want to put your subtitle, where you want to put your author's name, your illustrator's name, and all of the information that goes on the cover of a book. Not all people who illustrate know how to do that, right? So you want to make sure that you are hiring not only your graphic designer, but also your illustrators. Some illustrators work with graphic designers and they have a tag team and they just work together. Some illustrators are graphic designers. I'm a testament to that, where I do both illustration and graphic design. It just sort of depends on the project and it depends on their role. But I would not hire two people to do the same job because that can cause lots of confusion down the line. So for instance, did a children's book 2023. And in that book, I did the illustrations for the children's book. I also did the cover illustration and the cover layout, right? The author then went and hired, and this was a lot because she just didn't know any better. And she had someone who was sort of leading the way for her. She just didn't know, right? But she ended up hiring a second designer who then went and made changes to the book cover layout and did a whole bunch of other stuff that was already completed. So she was just sort of paying redundancy. And in that case, again, she had two people working on the same thing. And so when it was time to change certain things or to get certain files and certain information, she didn't know which one of us had it, right? Because she was managing this project and just was very new to the hiring process. So yes, you can hire two creative professionals. I would just be sure that they're not doing the same function, not the same role. And they can work together. It just sort of depends on the project. It depends on their respective roles and what they have to do with each other, right? So again, with the children's book example, you may have someone who is doing just the illustrations and you may have someone who is doing just the layouts. They can actually work together so that they're forming illustrations that work with the layout. So they're designing a book that speaks to whoever the audience is. So great question, Black Zetu. Again, I really appreciate it. So I think that's going to be it. If you guys, again, have any questions about hiring a graphic designer illustrator, if you have any questions about illustration in general, any of those things like that, please let me know in the comments below. If you're watching this, if you're watching the replay, if you're watching this live, leave it in the chat. I'll see it and we can address it the next episode. But do check out, I have a series of videos called Hire Like a Boss, which go through all of the things that you should know, red flags that you should be aware of, just sort of all of the information that you should know before you go into hiring a graphic designer or illustrator for your job. So without further ado, I hope you have a happy, prosperous, and creative week. And whether you're watching this live or the replay, I really appreciate you for being here. And until next Sunday, peace.